Hello and welcome to Easy Academy again. In this particular tutorial, we're going to be covering how to synchronize your search stores with your databases using Kafka Connect. So the main idea is that changes are going to be happening inside your database. You are going to be having insert statements, update statements, delete statements happening at the database layer, and those changes need to be reflected in near real time in the ElasticSearch or in any other search system that you have. That could be Azure Cognitive Search, it could be ElasticSearch, but for this tutorial, we're going to be covering ElasticSearch because everything fits inside a Docker container locally. So in the first video, I talked about the architecture, where we covered why we're doing this and how the different components that are involved do integrate and how they work with each other. In this particular video, we're going to be covering how we set things up. So that's going to be the main focus today, and then in a subsequent video, the third part of this series, we're going to be covering the exact hands-on interaction and how things are flowing through in near real time. So to talk about the agenda today, we're going to be covering setting up the Docker Compose environment. So I'm going to boot up, walk you through all those components that are involved. Then we're going to load the data into the MySQL database, and then we're going to be walking through Postman and how we use that to push the configurations into Kafka Connect to get things started. And then we'll use the CLI for the Kafka console consumer, and then we're going to use that to interact. So we have several CLIs that we're going to be using, but that's the main one that we're going to be using in this particular setup. So once this is done, the next thing I would like you to follow along is to go ahead and head out to this repository so you can follow along with me, download the scripts, download the code, and then follow along with me as I'm doing this. So if we navigate to the actual GitHub repository, so basically you just go to the code and then you click on this. Once you do that, you should be able to have the URL that you can put in your command line environment, and you just check out the code to your local environment. So once we check everything out, you should be able to have it available locally. So but the way to do that, you just do git clone and then you specify the URL, and once you press enter, that pretty much downloads the content that I have here to your local environment. So now we have the code in the environment. The commands to run it are available here. So if you're running on Windows, you may have to delete these directories, these two folders manually. But if you're running on Unix or Mac OS X, then you can run this script here, and this would reset the environment for you. Now, what am I saying by resetting the environment? So if we head into the Compose folder, you're going to see two folders, the legacy folder and the craft folder. So let me make this bigger so that we can explore this together. All right, so we have these two folders, the craft folder and the legacy folder. So for this tutorial, I'm going to be running just one instance of Kafka broker without any zookeeper. So that's why we're going into the new approach that's available now since 2.8.0. So we have this reset data directory. Now, if you take a look at the Kafka directory here, obviously I have some things that I've been running before, so we need to wipe all of that out so that there's no conflict. And then if we go into the MySQL, similarly we have certain things that I ran earlier. So the point of this script is to make sure that we wipe everything out. Now, what is happening inside this script is that we specify the Kafka directory and the MySQL directory as the targets, and then we remove the folders, and then we go ahead and we create it again so that it is blank and empty from scratch. So running this removes all those different contents, and now we are good to go. Once we have this particular setup complete, next thing now is inside that folder I run my Docker Compose ops command, and this is going to boot up my environment. One thing that you have to make sure is that in your Docker instance, make sure that you have enough resources to support this workload. So in my own environment here, I'm using 4 CPUs, 6 gigs of memory, swap is 2, and then the other one is fine, whatever you have available. So make sure that you have enough resources available for you to do this. Otherwise, some of the containers may not come up properly and you may have issues. So let's make sure that Docker is still running. All right, so Docker is running fine, and we have reset the directory. Now we are ready to do our up command. So running this for the very first time, it may take about 5 minutes to load up, but because I've already downloaded the Docker images already, so this may take about 1 or 2 minutes. But right now it is booting up Kafka, booting up schema registry, REST proxy, and all those components. Let's briefly take a look at what's inside the code. So I have Visual Studio Code here that I'm using. If we take a look at the craft folder, we're going to see a Docker Compose file. So this Docker Compose file contains a debugger where I have a container that I just use to interact with the system, so I can get into that. But at the top of each container, you're going to see commands on how to get inside that container. So for Kafka, we have this as ready for schema registry, REST proxy, Connect, Elasticsearch, and MySQL. So let's see if our environment is done booting up. It is still loading up. So once Elasticsearch and MySQL is done, then the Connect instance would fully load up, and then we should be ready to go. So the Connect instance is going to be the last item that boots up after everything else is done. So if you're wondering why that's the case, so inside this setup here, I have configured the Connect instance to boot up only after Kafka, schema registry, Elasticsearch, and MySQL is booting up, and then the REST proxy will be booted up after schema registry and Kafka is booted up. So basically, the last thing that will boot up here that has dependencies on other components is the Kafka Connect instance. From the sound of my computer, it thinks like it seems like everything has been fully loaded. So now we're good to go. Remember, we had the compose as the first option for us to set up. The next thing we're going to do now is we're going to go into the database and start loading up the data sets. So let's get started. So if we go into the folders, just want to point this out. You're going to see MySQL. You're also going to see Postman. So this is where you're going to have the Postman script. This Postman script, you can go to your Postman environment and then go to import, and then you should be able to upload that import that Postman script into your environment. So once you import it, you're going to have a section like this one here that I have saying Kafka powered database search sync. So that's what you're going to have. I was doing some testing, so that's why this is still opening. I mean, it's still open, but that's how it's going to look like. So the next thing in the item in our agenda for this video is to go ahead and load the data. So I will go ahead and open up the MySQL 0 command and then get started with that one. By the way, the instruction is right here on what to do. So we load MySQL 0 first, 1, and then 2. 0 contains the setup of the databases and the permissions that Debezium needs to pull data out of MySQL into Kafka. So how do I do that? I copy this command and I log into the database in a separate window. So in this particular window here, we can get into the container using that command. Now that we're inside MySQL, the next thing I'm going to do is going to be to run these commands here. If you open the file, you're going to see what's happening. It is setting up the permissions for the user that Debezium would use to connect. So now that permission has been set up. Next thing is the data definition language. So data definition language is defining the database entity, which in this case is the customers table, and this customers table is going to be where our data is going to be loaded into. So I copy this, I go back here, and now if I do show databases, that database was created. And then if we do use e-commerce and then do show tables, you're going to see that the customers table was created. Now if we do a describe customers, I can see the data structure of that table. So the table is set up now with the DDL statement, or the data definition language statement. The next thing now is for us to go ahead and load some data into that table. So to do that, we have the data manipulation script that contains the insert statements into the table. So I will copy this, head over here, and then run this. Now that loads everything. So if we do a select from customers, we're going to see that our records have been loaded successfully. Now the data is loaded. The next thing is for us to head out to the Kafka Connect instance in Postman, and then we can load up the changes. So now what we're going to do first is we're going to go ahead and check the different segments that I have here. So I have the REST proxy. REST proxy is something that Confluent created that allows you to interact with your Kafka brokers using a REST API. So that will be helpful, because as you can see here, I can use this to query the Kafka brokers and see a list of topics that I have. If I don't use this, I will have to use a CLI tool or the admin client, and that can get bulky. So I just like to simplify things for you. So if you use the REST API and you can interact with this, you can see here that we have just 4 topics. These are internal topics that is being used to manage the Kafka Connect ecosystem. So that's it for now. As we start up the connectors, more topics will be generated, and you will see that shortly. So let's head over to the Kafka Connect. If we run this first command, it shows us all the plugins that we have installed. So we have the ElasticSearch plugin, we have the Azure Search plugin, we have the Cosmos DB plugin, the MySQL DB plugin, and then other plugins are also available. Now, if we run this to see, you can see it returns an empty array indicating that there is no connector that has been set up yet. So why don't we do that? Let's go ahead and run this. So if we run this 65 raw, it goes ahead to create a connector that allows us to pull data directly out of Kafka, out of MySQL into Debezium. Now, in this setup here, the key is kind of like an Avro formatted object or data structure, and we don't want that. We want to use the customer ID that's available here as the key of the message, and then the contents would be that the body of the message. So in order to do that, I have a different item here that allows me to extract the keys. But this again also has some slight issues, because when we're dealing with tombstone records, meaning that when the delete operation happens at the database layer, Kafka sends something called a tombstone. Now, if you would like to learn more about tombstone records and what it means and how it works, please feel free to put out a comment and I will create a video on that. But when a tombstone is created with this setup here, it does not work properly. So we need to do a separate one that I called a predicate, which allows us to create a conditional statement that if the record is a tombstone, we should ignore that record so that it will just flow through as is. And then if it's not a tombstone, then we should process it and try to extract the customer ID key from the value. Now, it is not possible to do that with the value because tombstones have only a key and no value. The value is null. So that causes problems. So I created these different setups here so that you can be able to see for yourself, and I'm able to use that. So let's go ahead and create all of this, and we would see how this works in real time when we get to the demo phase of things. So I'm gonna go ahead and create the ElasticSearch connector, the sync connector. All right, so this here is gonna create a topic called eStream65.ecommerce.customers, because if we go over to the REST proxy now and we take a look at the topics, before that was done, you see we have only 4 topics here. But if we run this again, those topics have been created. And then if we want to take a quick look at the data, let's take a look at the Kafka Connect instances. So if I head out to the Docker Compose script again, at the top of the schema registry entry, you're going to see a command that you can use to get into the schema registry container. Now we are doing this because the schema registry container is where we have the client that we're going to use. So I get into the user bin folder, and if you take a look at some of the Kafka things, we have the Avro console consumer and producer, the JSON console consumer and producer, and the protocol buffer console consumer and producer. But for this demo, I'm going to be using just this one. So the command for us to interact with this is available in this directory here. So if I run this first command here, it should allow me to see all the changes that have flowed through from the database. All right, so let me pick a different topic. So we're gonna run on 65. So when we do this now, you can see that the customer ID key is an Avro object, and then the body is also an Avro object. And then if you pay attention to the operation type, it's R, meaning that it is a snapshot. So this is explained in much detail in the Debezium connector. When you perform an insert statement, it puts C as the operation type, which means a record is created. U means a record has been modified or updated. D means a record has been removed or deleted, and R means that it is doing this for the very first time as a snapshot. So in this particular topic here, where the key is an Avro message and the body is an Avro message, you can see that the snapshot was pulled the very first time. Now if we go to the database and we modify any record, so I'm going to go ahead and do update customers set first name equals Israel, where customer ID equals 599. So this causes this record to be modified, and we should be able to see that change come through. So as you can see, that change came along, and the operation type is update. So I'm going to do this again so that it's much clearer. So let's run this command again. So set customer equals easy academy, where customer ID equals 599. So that creates a modification statement, and as you can see here, it shows us the before and then it shows us the after. And the before was that the name was Israel, but in this new statement the name is Easy Academy. If you take a look closely right here, and the operation type is an update. Now if I want to modify this statement and make it a delete, so I can say delete from customers where customer ID equals 599. So you're going to see another operation show up. In this case here, the customer ID shows up and the value is a null, meaning it is sending a tombstone record to that particular event. So this marks the conclusion of this particular setup. To summarize what we did, we went ahead and we booted up the Docker Compose instance to bring up and activate all the components. We loaded data into the database. We used the Kafka Connect to push the configurations to Kafka Connect to set up the Connect workers. And then we played with the data to see that the changes were flowing through. In the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and walk you through how these changes are flowing from the MySQL instance into Kafka Connect and then into Elasticsearch. And we're going to do an end-to-end use case of doing the inserts, the updates, and the deletes. So I'm going to go ahead now and summarize what we have covered so far. We did the architecture in the first video. We did the setup in this video. In my next video, as part of this series, is going to be an interactive demo where we're going to be walking you through the entire use cases for insert, updates, and deletes, and I'm going to show you how to query that in Elasticsearch as well. So I thank you very much for your time so far. If you like this content, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and also share it with someone that you think would benefit from this content. I also have a course on my website, and the link to the course will be in the description. So if you are interested in learning more about Kafka, open source data stores, and workloads, you can check out the course and give me feedback on what you think. So that's everything we have for today. Thank you very much for your time, and I will see you in the next video.